The hearing room in the Rayburn House office building was quieter than usual on that late November afternoon in 2025, the kind of hush that settles over a courtroom just before a verdict is read. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, but the usual murmur of staffers and reporters had died down to almost nothing. Everyone sensed that something consequential was about to happen. At the center of the raised dais sat FBI Director Kash Patel, hands folded, jaw set, eyes fixed somewhere above the heads of committee members, as if he could will the moment to pass by sheer concentration. Directly in front of him, microphone hot, notes meticulously organized, sat Congresswoman Deborah Ross, Democrat, North Carolina, and from the moment she began to speak, it was clear that this would not be another perfunctory round of 5-minute questioning. Ross did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke in the calm, deliberate cadence of a former prosecutor who knows that facts, delivered plainly and in order, are more devastating than any display of theatrical outrage. She began where every good cross-examination begins, with the witness's own words, given under oath, at a time when he still had convinced the United States Senate that he was fit to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Patel, she said, I'm going a little out of order here because I'm going to pursue some of the things that you were just talking to Mr. Fry about and remind you about your confirmation hearing. At your confirmation hearing in January, you said under oath, and I quote, "There will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed." And in your written response to the Senate questionnaire, you said, I quote, "Personnel decisions shall be based on performance and adherence to the law, and every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments." She paused just long enough for the words to settle over the room like dust after an explosion. Those were not throwaway lines in prepared opening statement. They were promises Patel had made when he still needed Democratic votes, or at least the appearance of bipartisan acquiescence, to ascend to one of the most powerful law enforcement positions on earth. Now, 11 months into Donald Trump's second term, Ross intended to hold him to every syllable. She continued, "So I want to go through a couple of scenarios with you to get a sense of whether you think these are examples of politicization of the FBI or making decisions based on performance and adherence to the law." The first question was so basic it almost sounded naive. Would hiring FBI agents, analysts, and supervisors from only one political party be politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law? Patel's answer came quickly, almost reflexively. "We don't ask FBI applicants where their political parties are." It was a non-answer dressed up as policy, and Ross treated it as such. She followed up immediately. "Mr. Patel, do you ask FBI applicants who they voted for?" "The FBI does not," he replied, emphasizing the word FBI, as if the institution itself could absorb responsibility for whatever its political appointees might do. Ross did not blink. "Are you aware that in the lawsuit that Mr. Driscoll filed against you in the FBI, he was asked who he voted for?" Patel shifted almost imperceptibly in his chair. "Since that lawsuit has been filed, that's ongoing litigation. I'm not able to comment." The dodge was textbook, but Ross was ready for it. "Well, but it also means that you just said that what happened in his situation didn't happen," she observed dryly. "So we will go on to the next question." She had drawn first blood without ever raising her voice. Patel had just testified on live television that the FBI does not inquire about voting history, only be confronted with sworn allegations that senior officials reporting to him had done precisely that. The contradiction hung in the air like cordite. Ross moved to the second scenario, even more elemental than the first. Does firing agents for working on the cases that they were assigned to and that the president didn't like, is that politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law? Again, Patel reached for a prepared line. The FBI doesn't terminate anyone based on case assignments alone. Has the FBI ever been sued by somebody who felt that they were terminated based on case assignments in the entire history of the FBI? Ross asked, almost conversationally. "I'm sure they have," Patel allowed. "No," Ross corrected gently. "Since your tenure, I'm sure there's ongoing litigation." "Yes, in fact, there's ongoing litigation. And in fact, people have been asked who they voted for. And in fact, You are running an FBI for the President of the United States rather than the people of the United States because my questions were not hypotheticals. They are the things you have done during your tenure. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, she began to name names. She started with Brian Driscoll, former acting deputy director of the FBI, a 20-year veteran who had earned the FBI Medal of Valor for bravery during a dangerous ISIS-related raid in 2017. Driscoll had led the Critical Incident Response Group and was widely regarded, even by many Republicans, as one of the Bureau's most capable crisis managers. According to the lawsuit filed the previous week, when Trump transition officials interviewed Driscoll for a senior leadership position in the second Trump administration, they did not ask about his management philosophy or his plans for modernizing the Bureau's technical capabilities. They asked who he had voted for in the last 5 presidential elections. Driscoll refused to answer on principle, stating that such questions impermissibly politicize the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Within weeks, he was gone. Next came Steve Jensen, another 19-year veteran who had run some of the FBI's most sensitive counterterrorism and counterintelligence operations. Patel himself had once praised Jensen publicly as embodying what the American public demands of the FBI. Yet after January 6, investigators under Jensen's indirect supervision continued their work into 2025, and after MAGA influencers launched an online pressure campaign demanding Jensen's ouster, he too was removed. The timing was not subtle. Finally, Ross named Special Agent Walter Guardia, a decorated combat veteran whose personnel file read like a recruitment poster, multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, dozens of high-risk arrests, and years spent working Russian counterintelligence cases, including portions of the Trump-Russia investigation and the subsequent probe into Trump advisor Peter Navarro. Guardia's sin, apparently, was that he had done his job too well on cases that remained politically radioactive to the president and his supporters. He, too, was pushed out. 3 careers, spanning a combined total of more than half a century of service. 3 men with exemplary records. 3 men whose only discernible offense was having worked on investigations that Donald Trump and his movement preferred to see buried. Ross laid the timeline out in merciless detail, citing dates, document-based numbers, sworn declarations, and internal memos that had been produced in discovery. There was no bombast, no table pounding. Only the quiet accumulation of evidence until the pattern became undeniable. Director Patel, she concluded, it is very clear that you have flunked your own test. You've put saving your job, which I actually believe you were being honest about during your confirmation hearings, over doing what's right for the FBI and the American people. That is not adherence to the law. And with that, she yielded back her time. The silence that followed was profound. Even the Republican side of the dais, usually quick with supportive interjections or procedural rescue operations, remained mute. C-SPAN's cameras caught Patel staring straight ahead, lips pressing to a thin line, the muscle in his jaw working almost imperceptibly. He had come to the hearing armed with talking points about restoring integrity and ending the weaponization of the Justice Department. But those phrases now sounded hollow against the specificity of Ross's presentation. What made the exchange so devastating was not merely the substance, although the substance was damning, but the method. Ross had not trafficked in vague accusations of deep state sabotage or two-tier justice, the rhetorical currency of the modern right. She had done exactly what conservatives had spent years demanding Democrats do. She brought the receipts, statutes cited, oaths quoted verbatim, lawsuits docketed, declarations signed under penalty of perjury, a timeline printed in 11-point font and entered into the official hearing record. There was no plausible deniability left. In the hours that followed, the clip of Ross's questioning rocketed across social media, not just on left-leaning accounts, but on center-right, and even some libertarian feeds that still profess unease about executive overreach. If this is what draining the swamp looks like, one widely shared post read, then the swamp just got deeper and murkier. Even some Trump-supportive commentators who had initially dismissed the lawsuits as sour grapes litigation from disgruntled employees found themselves at a loss when confronted with Patel's inability to answer even the most elementary hypothetical questions about political neutrality. The deeper significance of the hearing lies in what it revealed about the velocity and thoroughness of the institutional capture underway inside the FBI. When Donald Trump left office in January 2021, the Bureau still possessed, despite 4 years of presidential attacks, a deeply ingrained culture of political independence. Career employees prided themselves on the motto fidelity, bravery, integrity, and many had risked their careers during Trump's first term to uphold it. But the second Trump administration arrived with a very different theory of governance. That loyalty to the president and loyalty to the Constitution were not in tension, but synonymous. Neutral institutions were not to be respected. They were to be conquered. Patel was the perfect instrument for that project. A former House staffer who had made his name alleging a vast conspiracy against Trump inside the Justice Department, Patel had spent years positioning himself as the tip of the spear in the president's war on the deep state. His reward was a directorship of the FBI, an appointment that would have been unthinkable in any prior administration, Republican or Democratic. From day one, he made clear that the old rules no longer applied. The lawsuits and whistleblower accounts that Ross referenced paint a chilling picture of how that new order was imposed. Senior career officials were summoned to one-on-one meetings with political appointees and asked point-blank about their voting history, their social media activity, their opinions of the 2020 election. Some were shown printouts of old Facebook posts criticizing Trump and asked to explain themselves. Others were told, in so many words, that retaining their security clearances, and thus their jobs, would depend on demonstrating sufficient alignment with the administration's priorities. A handful attempted to raise concerns through the Inspector General or the Office of Special Counsel. Most simply left, taking with them decades of institutional knowledge about Russian intelligence operations, domestic extremism, and cyber threats. Perhaps most alarming is the speed with which the purge moved from the senior ranks downward. Entry-level analysts hired to the post 9/11 surge began reporting that their background investigations now included questions about political affiliation that had never appeared on previous SF-86 forms. Training academies at Quantico saw instructors replaced overnight with loyalists whose chief qualification appeared to be public statements of fealty to the president. One former instructor told the Washington Post, on condition of anonymity, fearing retaliation, that new agents were now explicitly instructed that protecting the country sometimes means protecting Commander-in-Chief from his enemies, foreign and domestic. Against this backdrop, Deborah Ross's performance stands as one of the few genuine acts of congressional oversight in the early second Trump term. While much of the Democratic caucus has struggled to find its footing amid GOP control of both chambers and a 6-3 Supreme Court majority, Ross demonstrated that individual members armed with preparation, principle, and a willingness to speak uncomfortable truths can still shift the national conversation. She did not merely score political points. She created a permanent public record that will complicate every future attempt to normalize what is happening inside the FBI. It is worth lingering on the human cost of that normalization. Brian Driscoll, the Medal of Valor recipient, now works in the private sector, consulting on crisis management for corporations that can afford his expertise. Steve Jensen has taken a teaching position at a university hundreds of miles from Washington, telling friends he no longer recognizes the Bureau he gave 2 decades to. Walter Gardia's whereabouts are unknown. His attorney will only say that his client is safe and considering his options. These are not abstract bureaucrats. These are men who ran toward gunfire, who spent Christmases away from their families on overseas assignments, who kept the country safe during some of its darkest hours. And they have been discarded because they refuse to transform the FBI into an American Praetorian Guard. History rarely announces its turning points with trumpets. More often they arrive in the form of quiet moments in fluorescent-lit hearing rooms where one elected official decides that the cost of silence has grown too high. On that Tuesday in November 2025, Deborah Ross chose to speak. And in doing so, she reminded the country what democratic accountability actually looks like when it is practiced with courage and rigor. Whether that reminder will be heeded, whether the American public, exhausted by a decade of institutional crisis, still possesses the will to demand better, remains an open question. But the record now exists. The names have been named. The promises have been exposed as lies. And the warning has been sounded in a voice steady enough to cut through the noise of our fractured age. If the United States manages to preserve an independent law enforcement capability through this era, Future historians will point to moments like Ross's questioning of Patel as evidence that the Republic's immune system, though battered, had not yet failed entirely. And if it does not, if the FBI is ultimately remade into an instrument of personal loyalty rather than public trust, then those same historians will mark this hearing as one of the last clear chances we had to stop it. Either way, the country owes Congresswoman Deborah Ross a debt it may never fully repay. She came with receipts. She left with the truth. And in an era when both have become increasingly rare commodities, that is no small thing. Kashyap Kash Patel, born in 1980, is a Long Island, raised lawyer of Gujarati Indian descent who spent the bulk of his early career as a public defender in Florida, and then as a Justice Department prosecutor specializing in narcotics and terrorism cases. He first entered Trump world in 2017 as a senior counsel on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, then chaired by Devin Nunes, Republican California. Patel quickly became the chief author of the controversial 2018 Nunes memo, which alleged that the FBI and DOJ had misled the FISA court in order to spy on Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. That document turned Patel into a MAGA celebrity overnight. From 2019 to 2021, he held a dizzying series of Trump White House roles: Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council, Chief of Staff to Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller, and finally Deputy Director of National Intelligence. In every position, he was a ferocious loyalist who repeatedly accused the FBI of orchestrating a coup against Trump. He co-authored a children's book titled The Plot Against the King and regularly appeared on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast promising retribution against the deep state once Trump returned to power. When Trump won the 2024 election, he nominated Patel to be FBI Director on November 15, 2024, just 10 days after Election Day. The choice stunned even many Republican senators. The FBI directorship has traditionally been treated as a quasi-sacred, apolitical post. Edgar Hoover aside, every modern director from Louis Freeh to Chris Wray have been a career prosecutor or judge with decades of law enforcement experience and a reputation for independence. Patel, by contrast, had never run a field office, never managed more than a few dozen people, and had spent the previous 7 years publicly trashing the bureau he was now nominated to lead. Nevertheless, with Republicans holding 53 Senate seats, Patel confirmed on February 6, 2025 by a party-line 53-47 vote after a bruising hearing in which he promised, under oath, zero politicization and zero retribution. 2. What exactly has happened inside the FBI since February 2025? Within 72 hours of being sworn in, Patel issued an order leaked to the Washington Post directing every senior executive service (SES) employee, roughly the top 350 officials, to re-interview for their own jobs with Trump political appointees. The interview panels included Trump 2020 campaign alumni and former Trump White House officials. According to multiple lawsuits and whistleblower complaints, candidates were asked who they voted for in 2016, 2020, and 2024. They were shown old social media posts criticizing Trump and asked to explain them. They were asked their views on the events of January 6 and whether the 2020 election had been stolen. Refusal to answer was treated as disqualifying. By May 2025, more than 60 SES officials, nearly 20% of the top rank, had been removed or reassigned to field offices in Alaska, North Dakota, and Puerto Rico. The purge then moved downward. Assistant special agents in charge, ASACs, unit chiefs, and even some longtime legal attaches overseas were replaced with younger loyalists, many of whom had worked on the Trump campaign or at conservative think tanks. At the same time, Patel created a new election integrity task force, staffed almost exclusively with lawyers and agents who had previously worked on Trump's post-2020 election lawsuits. Critics immediately pointed out that the task force's mandate duplicated existing units inside the public integrity section and appeared designed to investigate Trump's political opponents rather than protect elections. The three men Deborah Ross named, and why their removals are so damaging. Brian Driscoll served 2005 to 2025. Former Marine Medal of Valor recipient for a 2017 hostage rescue raid in Syria. Rose to acting deputy director in the final months of the Biden administration, widely seen as a leading candidate for permanent deputy director. Removed March 2025 after refusing to answer questions about his voting history. Steve Jensen served 2006 to 2025. Ran the Washington Field Office's counterterrorism division during the height of ISIS, and again during the post-January 6 domestic terrorism surge. Publicly praised by Patel himself in 2024 as the gold standard. Removed June 2025 after MAGA influencers discovered he had supervised some of the pipe bomb investigation from January 6 Special Agent Walter Guardia, sometimes spelled Jardina in early reporting. Army Ranger, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, 22 years in the FBI. Key member of both Crossfire Hurricane, 2016 Russia probe, and the subsequent Peter Navarro contempt investigation. Removed August 2025 after internal records showed he had authored portions of the Mueller report annexes. These were not marginal figures. They were among the most decorated, experienced operational leaders in the entire Bureau. Their collective removal sent a shockwave through the rank and file for the lawsuits and the receipts. By November 2025, at least 7 federal lawsuits have been filed in the District of Columbia and Eastern District of Virginia alleging unlawful retaliation, violation of the Civil Service Reform Act, and First Amendment retaliation. The most explosive was Driscoll et al. V. Patel et al. Filed November 12, 2025, exactly 1 week before the Ross hearing. That complaint attached. Sworn declarations from 11 current and former officials' copies of the political vetting questionnaires' internal emails explicitly linking personnel decisions to MAGA alignment scores, a spreadsheet ranking SES officials on a 1 to 10 loyalty scale. These documents are what Ross was holding in her hand when she said, "I'm not asking hypotheticals." 5. Why Ross's questioning was surgically devastating. Most congressional questioning is theater. Members read Stafford's statements. The witness filibusters. Time expires. Nothing changes. Ross did the opposite. She quoted Patel's own confirmation testimony verbatim, creating an irreconcilable conflict on the record. She asked binary, kindergarten-level questions. Is a politicization a hire only from one party? That any honest witness would answer yes, forcing Patel either to lie or admit guilt. Every time he tried to hide behind ongoing litigation, she pointed out that his previous sentence, "The FBI does not do that," was now contradicted by the very litigation he was citing. She named specific human beings with unimpeachable credentials, making the purge personal rather than abstract. She ended with moral indictment. "You've flunked your own test." That will be quoted in History Books Point 6. Immediate aftermath and broader implications. Within 48 hours of the hearing, the Driscoll lawsuit was amended to include the C-SPAN transcript of Patel's answers as Exhibit 8.2. Republican senators, Collins and Murkowski, issued statements saying they were deeply troubled and would seek briefings. The FBI Agents Association, normally apolitical, issued a rare public letter expressing grave concern about politicized personnel practices. Fox News primetime host attacked Ross personally, but conspicuously did not defend the substance of Patel's answers. More importantly, the hearing crystallized a growing fear among national security professionals that the U.S. is sliding toward the kind of politicized law enforcement agencies seen in Hungary, Turkey, and Brazil, where the secret police and federal investigators become tools of the ruling party consolidation rather than guardians of the rule of law. 7. What happens next? Short term, the Driscoll case is on an expedited discovery schedule. Judge Trevor McFadden, a Trump appointee, has already ordered the Justice Department to produce the full SCS re-interview files by January 15, 2026, a House Democrats' plan to call Driscoll Jensen and Guardia to testify in closed session before Christmas 2025. Senate Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin has requested Patel return for a second oversight hearing in January. Long term, if the courts ultimately uphold the firings based on refusal to disclose voting history or political beliefs, it will effectively end the merit-based civil service at the FBI's highest levels. Future presidents of either party will be able to install pure loyalists at every echelon of federal law enforcement. The American experiment with an apolitical investigative agency, begun in 1908 when Theodore Roosevelt created the Bureau of Investigation explicitly to insulate it from political tampering, will be over because he had overseen parts of the January 6th investigation, because it refused demands from MAGA activists, from right-wing influencers, from political operatives to slow walk, obstruct, or derail the probe into the attack on the Capitol, because he had done his job. Online mobs had targeted him. His name had appeared on lists circulated by extremist accounts demanding retribution. And then, almost as if by magic, he was gone, reassigned, demoted, and eventually pushed into retirement. Senator Ross looked directly at Patel. "You called him the model agent," she said, her voice flat, almost conversational. "What changed?" Patel began to answer. Something about personnel decisions being complex, about ongoing litigation preventing him from commenting fully. But Ross was already moving on. She had more names. Walter Jardina, combat veteran, decorated, a career built in the hardest corners of federal law enforcement. Jardina had worked on the Russia investigation, the one that began long before Trump took office, but that Trump and his allies had spent years demonizing as a hoax and a witch hunt. Jardina had also been involved in the investigation into Peter Navarro, the former Trump advisor convicted of contempt of Congress for defying a January 6 committee subpoena. And Walter Jardina, too, was removed. Again, not for misconduct, not for incompetence, not for any failure of duty. He was removed because his work had crossed paths with cases that Donald Trump found politically inconvenient. 3 men, 3 careers of unquestioned excellence. 3 men pushed out under Kash Patel's leadership for one common reason. They had worked on investigations that threatened Donald Trump or his allies, and they had refused to compromise those investigations for political reasons. Senator Ross did not shout pattern. She did not need to. The pattern announced itself. She turned to Patel's favorite talking point, the one he had repeated in interviews, in written statements, in every friendly media appearance since his nomination. No one has ever fired the FBI simply for the cases they work on. Case assignments are never the basis for personnel actions. It was a clean, simple, reassuring line. It sounded principled. It sounded like a defense of the Bureau's independence. Senator Ross dismantled it in under 2 minutes. She read from internal FBI documents, from sworn declarations in ongoing lawsuits, from whistleblower complaints filed by current and former agents. She read the dates, the names of the supervisors involved, the exact wording of the directives. And when she was done, the talking point lay in ruins, because the record showed, clearly, unmistakably, that Brian Driscoll, Stephen Jensen, Walter Jardina, and others had been targeted precisely because of the cases they had worked on, not because of performance reviews, not because of budget cuts, not because of restructuring, because of politics. Patel tried to interrupt at one point, raising the shield of ongoing litigation like a talisman. Ross brushed it aside. "Mr. Patel," she said, "the litigation is ongoing because the people you pushed out are fighting in court to prove exactly what I'm describing. They're not making it up. They have documents. They have emails. They have witnesses. You can hide behind, 'I can't comment on pending litigation,' all you want, but the American people can read. And they're reading." She wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She was citing chapter and verse. And then she delivered the line that will be quoted for years. "You have failed your own standard, Mr. Patel. You said no one would be fired for the cases they worked on. But under your leadership, that is exactly what has happened. You are not running the FBI for the American people. You are running it for the president." The room went still. This was not hyperbole. This was not a both sides lecture about norms and civility. This was a United States senator, under oath, on live television, accusing the nominee for FBI director of overseeing a politically motivated purge of the Bureau's senior leadership. And she had the receipts. Patel's responses grew visibly thinner as the questioning went on. He fell back on bureaucratic phrases. "That's not how the FBI operates. I'm not familiar with that specific case. Personnel matters are confidential." Each evasion sounded weaker than the last, because Ross never argued with him. She never let him turn it into a debate. She simply kept reading the facts. She read an email from a senior Trump transition official asking whether certain FBI personnel could be relied upon to get with the program. She read a memo directing supervisors to review the case histories of agents who had worked January 6th or Russia-related investigations. She read the timeline that showed how, Within weeks of Patel taking over as acting director, the very people who had led those investigations began disappearing from their posts. And when Patel tried to suggest that these were ordinary personnel changes, Ross read the performance reviews. Driscoll, outstanding. Jensen, exemplary. Jardina, exceeds expectations. Every box checked. Every metric met. Every commendation earned. These were not dead with being cleared out. These were the best of the best being disappeared. She closed with a warning, delivered not in anger but in sorrow. When you fire career professionals because they worked on cases you don't like, when you replace expertise with loyalty, when you turn federal law enforcement into an instrument of political retribution, you are not reforming the FBI. You are destroying it. And once it is destroyed, it cannot be easily rebuilt. The damage lasts for generations. She looked at Patel one last time. That hearing was not just a moment of truth. It was a line in the sand. On one side stands the idea that law enforcement must be blind to politics, that the FBI serves the Constitution and the people, not the president in power. On the other side stand the idea that power should be used to reward friends and punish enemies, that institutions exist to protect the leader, not the law. Senator Ross made sure the American people could see exactly which side Kash Patel had chosen. And now the rest of us have to decide whether we will let him finish what he started. This was not about policy differences. This was not about draining the swamp or reform. This was about whether the Federal Bureau of Investigation would remain an independent law enforcement agency or be transformed into the personal guard of a president seeking vengeance against his enemies. Senator Ross did not save the Republic single-handedly that day. The Senate still has to vote. Politics still operates according to its own brutal math. But she did something just as important. She put the truth on the record. She named the victims. She exposed the pattern. She forced the country to look directly at what was happening inside one of its most powerful institutions.